Tylor Berreth. He is going to talk about wild mushroom species of the valley and their medicinal uses. His interest in mushrooms grew while he attended MSU of Denver. Currently, his passion is directed at cultivating specialty mushrooms, improving local ecosystems through bioremediation, as well as improving the health of his local community. He's based in the San Luis Valley and actually just a few miles from here, and he is a practicing mycologist and specialty mushroom cultivator with his wife and son, who you've probably seen. They have a booth out there in the event center, and Tylor is also producing food for our community, and that's just so huge. So thank you, Tylor.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you, Jay, for all your hard work. Killing it. Doing so good. Some serious work. So I'm so glad you guys are here today. I want to get everybody stoked on mushrooms. That's like my main goal. So I'm just really grateful that you all are here. I'm kind of going to glance over a few like mindful foraging tips and some etiquette that we should probably have when we're going out into nature. Something I want you guys to keep in mind right before we even start is that edibility should literally be the last thing on your mind. It's usually the first thing on people's minds. It's usually the first thing I get asked, like, hey, can I eat this? It should definitely be, in my opinion, the last thing on your mind. What we need to be focusing on right now is learning ecology, learning systems. Honestly, if you want to learn your mushrooms, learn your trees first. They're really symbiotic with trees specifically and other types of life that you'll typically just be walking by. Just try to be mindful of ecology in general. What's popping up under these bushes? That might be mycorrhizal or connected to that root system of that plant. It's all connected in some way, so the more we can kind of take notes of the ecological aspects that are surrounding us, the better we can actually understand where they're going to be fruiting, when they're going to be fruiting, what's going to be fruiting where. So really, I just want us to be mindful of ecology. And I think my goal as a human is really just to get people out into nature more. I think that's going to be solving a lot of our issues alone, just that aspect. So I'm Tylor Berreth. We have a booth. We have Alpine Valley mushrooms over there. We sell our fresh mushrooms. We have mushroom extracts too. One of my deepest passions, though, is honestly finding wild foraged foods specifically, and mushrooms very specifically are very close to my heart. I found them because of some medicinal aspects that I was finding out in college, and all my professors, huge shout out to my professors at MSU Denver, because they really propagated my love for mycelium, helped me to. Dr. Kelsey Asplin and Dr. Stephen Risman, they're amazing humans. They didn't really know a whole lot about mushrooms until, I want to give them a lot of credit. They did know a lot, but they were not as well versed on mushrooms as like I was kind of expecting. So that's when they were just like, you need to keep following this. This is so crazy. Like there's so much evidence to it, so much scientific backing to them being very medicinal, to the point that other cultures are healing things that we still think are incurable. So we really need to be looking towards those other cultures and what they're using those medicinal mushrooms for. And that's why we should really be interested in mushrooms specifically. Mushrooms out in the wild are going to be far more valuable in general than mushrooms that you're going to find at the store. If you think about how much that mycelium has to come in contact with in order to even get to the fruiting stage, it requires a remarkably strong immune system. It is like being attacked by nematodes, bacteria, virus, all types of different microbial life it has to defend itself against to even get to that fruiting stage. So think about that. That's why it's really exciting to go forage wild mushrooms. That's why I find it so important to have a clean organic growing process as well, because I'm trying to mimic what's going on in nature the best that I can. Because I really want people to get the most medicinal product out of their mushrooms, but I really truly believe that's out of foraged mushrooms. I really would encourage you guys to buy our mushrooms, obviously, a shameless plug, but we do try to keep it as natural as possible. So if there's a species that's growing on something, say like an oak, we would try to cultivate that out on oak as well. If there's something on cottonwood, it's mostly ideal to do cottonwood, although nobody does cottonwood pellets that I know of, so it's a little bit more difficult. But we do what we can. So yeah, I fell in love with mushrooms once I found their medicinal values. Fell even more in love with them when I got into foraging with my wife Danielle. When we lived in Denver is actually when we ironically got really into foraging, because in Denver they are literally everywhere. There's turkey tails on so many stumps. There's these hawk's wings that are literally like people put their dogs on them and take photos. Like they're so huge, like huge conchs. And people are just passing them by, like literally peeing on them and just being like, I don't even care about that. Like that's just taking out the tree. Most people think they're pathogenic, so they're like, oh, take it out. Or like remove that tree because like that fungus is taking over. we really need to be seeing these as more symbiotic creatures. They're literally known as symbionts, both in nature and in the body. So I really would encourage people to not think of any of these as strictly pathogenic. They all play a really important role. Even molds play a really important role in our health and well-being. In fact, I want to actually touch on the microbiome a little bit, just really quickly. The microbiome has a fungal extension called the mycobiome. The mycobiome is roughly 10% makeup of your microbiome. If you do not have a healthy mycobiome by consuming lots of fungi, specifically wild fungi are really important for the microbiome, then you can have an aversion to a species that somebody loves. So there's variable differences amongst all these edibilities. Some people will get horrifically sick from some of these completely edible mushrooms. I really truly think once we start getting more into the science behind it, we're going to trace this back to the mycobiome and like destruction that's happening with the mycobiome specifically. I truly believe a lot of people's microbiomes are almost extinct at this point because we're so mycophobic. And that's really going to be to our detriment. So we really need to learn how important these are for not only our ecosystems, but actually literally our health and well-being. It's really important to understand that this is a very ancient practice as well. There's a lot of indigenous people that I've tried to talk to, and I find it really unfortunate because I think their history has been really ripped away from them because they don't even necessarily, I'm grouping they very generally, but in general, I don't really get a very strong response of like, yeah, we use those all the time. It's more, I think they did though. I think they really did use the mushrooms, and they were really communicating with the mushrooms and the plants. They would literally say they were talking to them. So we have all this science and all of this genetic testing to be like, oh, this is poisonous, this may harm you, but they were literally discussing that with the species themselves. And I feel like that's kind of important to really touch on a lot because that's really been lost, but it's really remarkably easy if you tap into your intuition to actually have those communication pathways opened again. And I think that's really important for us to try to open those pathways again so that we can communicate with them on a different level rather than just trying to understand them based on these analytics. So yeah, they are the reason we're here. They're literally, I mean, I can't say that indefinitely, but they were literally here before us, and we're just now discovering them. We're literally just scratching the surface on something that helped form us and create us. We have the mycobiome because we were literally formed from the fungi. Paul Stamets truly believes that 650 million years ago, we actually stemmed from fungi, like animals branched off of fungi. But I digress. That's not what this is really about. So mindful foraging etiquette, I really want everybody just to get outside. But I don't want to get people's hopes up too much. These are really difficult to find, although they are abundant in years where they're abundant. But there's a lot of times where we'll go out and have these high expectations. We're going to find this mushroom. We're going to find this many boletes. We're going to find all these amanitas. We don't find a single thing. And we really try not to get discouraged from that. We try to learn something every single time we go out. We're like, okay, this plant was growing here that we didn't notice before. This type of soil erosion is going on here. This is a different moisture level in the soil than we had last year or the years prior that they were popping up. One of the most important things, I think, is bringing an extra bag for trash. There's so much trash out there. It's absolutely mind-blowing. It's almost like in times, it's really disheartening because you see more trash than mushrooms. And it's really disheartening when you see a pop can and you're like, that's a mushroom. Oh, no, it's not. It's trash. So it's really important to like do our part. And the indigenous were always talking a lot about giving an offering when you took something. I think this is a great source of an offering to be like, look, I'm trying to clean you up. I'm sorry this happened. I'm sorry these people degraded you in this way, but I'm going to do my part, bring an extra bag. I usually fill up way more trash bags than I do mushroom baskets. So that's really important. Bring a trash bag. Always leave a little for the wildlife. This is a very controversial subject because there are studies showing that the more you pick, actually the more you can proliferate. So you're spreading spores. You're also invigorating the mycelium by pulling those mushrooms out, and the mycelium is invigorated to the point that it actually fruits out more. So a lot of people are like, don't harvest all of them because you're going to deplete the patch. I think that's pretty much proven to be false at this point, but wildlife depends on these too. Like wildlife is actually depending on some of these to increase their detox pathways coming out of hibernation. And if they don't have these, their immune system's so depleted they die. That's an extreme case. So I really encourage people to really try to leave these because they are super medicinal for the animals as well, not just us. And Paul Stamets did work on the bees when he found out that the bees were actually feeding on more of the mycelium than the flowers. And he was like, what's going on here? He found out that it was the mycelium itself was actually upgrading the bees' detox pathways to the point that they weren't succumbing to varroa mites anymore and deformed wing virus. That's just one example of one insect that relies on mycelium for its immune pathways. That is literally across the board for nature, I believe. We all require this fungi to be here, and we need to pay homage to it as well as the wildlife. Know your areas. We have a lot of BLM out here, which is amazing. It's such a cool resource to have to be able to just pop into the woods almost anywhere. Be really careful about national forests. Be really, really careful about private lands because you don't really know those boundaries unless you do that research. You could easily get shot. We have a really good stand your ground law here. There's also like if you talk to like forest rangers and stuff, like they're gonna say that you are gonna need a permit or that you should not actually ever take anything out of the forest, the national forest specifically. So walk that line as you must. When we're out foraging, this doesn't happen super often, but it's definitely a possibility. Wear bright colors because there's hunters out there too. Like we're hunting mushrooms, but other people are hunting animals too. So like there's been times where people get shot with a bow in the back or something like that. We got to be like super mindful about. You got to be a really mindless hunter for that to happen, to be honest. But I've seen some crazy stuff from humans, so I wouldn't put it past them. And it does happen. It's not common, so don't be scared of it, but just be mindful of it. I like wearing tie-dye because I'm just like, this is kind of my vibe with the mushrooms. I'm just like tie-dyeing with them. And it's just kind of, but it's also like really, it pops, you know, and like nobody's going to shoot me, hopefully. So bring a collection vessel that can actually disperse spores. That is a aerated basket or just kind of like a woven basket. That is going to allow spores to drop as you're leaving the forest. So that's where I am encouraging people to pick them, even if you don't necessarily know them, because you're helping proliferate that mycelium no matter what. You're spreading those spores further than they would have otherwise, unless an animal were to pick it up. And it's really remarkable, honestly. One spore will formulate a mycelial thread, and that has to reach another mycelial thread in order to mate. And the fact that this happens in nature all the time is really astounding because they are microscopic. And when you look at it from a macro view, you're like, I don't even think that should be possible. Always have a local guidebook. Local guidebooks are really, really important. We have an amazing one that I'll show you in just a sec. I'm way more scared of plants when I'm foraging for mushrooms. I've been poisoned way more from plants than I have ever been from mushrooms. And that's typically when I'm like, oh yes, and I'll rub up against something and then I'll go home and I'm just covered in a rash. So just be really mindful of what you're foraging around. You're not just foraging for the mushrooms, but you got to stay safe. Like there's a lot of toxins out there. There's a lot of safety out there, so I don't want to scare people, but there's probably, I'd be willing to say there's more toxic plants than there are mushrooms, to be honest. All right, so yes, remain hyper aware, deadly plants. Try not to trample a lot of microflora and microfauna. It might not necessarily be like that important to keep in mind, but I think it is important in a lot of aspects. But also if you think about, like, it's not giving nature much credit to be like, oh, if we walk on this, it's just gonna die. Like, humans were meant to walk on that. It was meant to be forage. I truly believe nature is out there for us to benefit from it and to be interacting with it directly. So I don't think it's really giving nature a whole lot of credit to be like, oh, if you step on this, it's never gonna come back. But be very mindful of it. Don't leave trash, don't leave tracks in like places that might get erosion, you know, or just things like that. Be super mindful of where the mushrooms are foraged, specifically around mining deposits. I get approached all the time. They're like, I was poisoned by this super edible mushroom. And it always boils back to being around a mining claim. These are myco-accumulators, so they accumulate heavy metals to a really crazy extent, some of them. It will literally kill you in some cases. Like some of the first things to pop up after Fukushima were morel mushrooms because they can bioremediate radiation so well. They can concentrate radioactive cesium up to 400 times in some cases, which would literally kill somebody. And people have died from morels, just a plug. Like, morels are not as safe as people think. They just need to be cooked. That's all it is. There should be no fear around them. But people have died from morels. And I think this actually might somewhat be correlated to what they're growing on, where they're foraged. They're all Chinese morels that people are getting poisoned and killed from. So something to that also. Just be really mindful about where they're foraged. They uptake aluminum, cadmium, barium, all these heavy metals that can be really toxic in large quantities for us. They're really good at absorbing out of the soil, which is why everybody's so interested in the bioremediation aspect. Because there's studies now that can show that mushrooms will fruit off of almost 100% oil. They will decompose almost anything, and especially the synthetic carbon chains that we've created, such as plastic. And that's why people are getting so fascinated, because it's uptaking these chemicals to a point that they can actually be reutilized organically in growing practices without detriment to our health. It's really remarkable. I think there's roughly 400 species that will start to break down plastic across the entirety of life itself. But a lot of them are fungi. A lot of them are bacteria also. But fungi have profound remediation benefits specifically, and they can also be trained to grow on different things. Like, I've seen oysters grow off of teddy bears and shoes, so they can actually be trained to grow on something more vigorously. So they found this plastic-eating mycelium, and I swear I'll move on to the foraged mushrooms in just a sec. They found this plastic-eating mycelium in Afghanistan. They pulled it out, or Pakistan, sorry. They pulled it out, accelerated that growth to allow it to eat plastic faster. So that's an example of how we could train something for bioremediation aspects. And this is where biomimicry comes in, which I try to educate all the kids about, because I think it's a really, really, really important concept. Always cook on high heat. Any mushroom, literally any mushroom, always cook on high heat. There are so many reports of GI distress, even death, and a lot of it actually comes down to how it was cooked. A lot of these poisons are degraded by heat. I would highly recommend never eating raw button mushrooms from the salad bar. It is super detrimental to your health. It's literally a carcinogen in its raw state, but it can be very easily broken down by heat. That's just one example of something that we had no idea about that is inundating our food supply that we eat raw all the time. It's a carcinogenic compound on the outside. But it can be very well broken down by heat. You have none of it left over if you break it down by heat. I recommend everybody cook all of their mushrooms all the time, at least 20 minutes high heat. That's my strong recommendation. Local groups. I hate talking about Facebook in a positive way, but there are definitely positive ways to use it. And these groups are one of the most positive ways I've ever used Facebook. If you're interested in Amanita muscaria specifically, which a lot of people have asked me about, specifically at this event, Amanita Science and Magic is an amazing Facebook group where everybody's posting their own trip reports, their own healing journeys. It's literally just anecdotal evidence of people eating this so-called deadly mushroom, having all these profound healing benefits. Also, AmanitaDreamer.net, she was somebody that actually tried to off herself with mushrooms, had this insane spiritual revelation, which happens very often with the muscaria, ironically. People will try to kill themselves with raw caps, and then they come to this very spiritual conclusion that it's far greater than us, that what we're dealing with, and then they end up becoming Amanita educators. It's really fascinating. Never forage with a serious hiker, because they will be pissed at you. All right, some super important keys for identification. Try to get to know spore prints as well as you can. Spore prints are super easy. I would recommend foil. Foil is the best way to recover a spore print, but it's also the easiest way to collect a spore print, in my opinion. But honestly, anything will work. Like, that is a top of a mason jar lid. And I find that the spores really pop in color on that type of, like, that aluminum or that type of metal. Also, I had this idea of getting a notebook and putting the spore prints in every single date that I actually found the mushroom. And that's been super helpful, because I actually recorded the date that I found the mushroom. I have the spore print on the date, so I could recover that spore print if I wanted to, if I was going to grow it out. Spore prints are really important to determine some deadly species versus the edible ones. And there's really only one I'm going to cover that is based on spore print alone. Not alone, but based mostly on spore print. Always get a second and third opinion. This is where the Facebook groups really come in. Post your photos. If you're going to post photos of the stock or the stipe. the base of it, where it's growing out of the ground, what it's growing out of, whether it's a tree or like the ground itself. Photo of the gills or the pores, and then just a photo of the cap. So try to cover all the bases of the anatomy. Just try to cover the entirety of the mushroom. Post that in identification groups, like Colorado Mycological Society is amazing. There's a lot of foraging groups based in Colorado specifically. There's so many experts on there, and it's really cool because you get anecdotal evidence of like, yeah, I've eaten that, or I've used that for years. And then sometimes in the book, you'll be like, stay away from it. But Colorado Mycological Society is a really good one to be a part of. The Mycological Society, yeah, Colorado Mycological Society, CMS. And then typing in that group alone will probably lead you in all these other directions of these other groups. I recommend joining all of them. They're phenomenal resources. All right, let's get into mushrooms. All right, touch, smell, bruising, colors, taste. These are all things that are really important to keep in mind. They're not necessarily all the time key identification characteristics, but these are really important things to keep in mind. Some mushrooms will bruise a certain color, and you know right away, nope, not edible. So take a note of that. You can taste and touch any mushroom, literally any mushroom. You can touch and taste them and not die or not get sick, as long as your liver does not metabolize those mycotoxins. I've seen a lot of foragers put heavy amounts of deadly mushrooms in their mouth, chew them for about 10 minutes, and then spit them out. Because they're not metabolized by their liver, no ill effects. And it's actually a really key identification characteristic to see what these taste like in their raw form. But never swallow. Just taste. That's why so this book that I'm going to recommend, it says the taste. That doesn't mean edibility. That means what it tastes like in its raw form, and then you spit it out. That is a very common foraging technique amongst mushroom foragers, is to take a little bite of it and just to see what that profile is before anything even, before it's cooked or before anything even happens, just in its pure raw state. This book on the left is by far, in my opinion, the best one for our region. It was written by Vera Stuckey Evanson and the Denver Botanic Gardens. There was an amazing collab. They cover a lot of the local species, but something that I want to mention too is there's a lot of nuance to all of this. You're going to see they pop up July through September. You'll find them outside of that region. You'll find them outside of that zone that they say they're going to pop up in oftentimes. You'll find them outside of the climate. There will be different weather patterns that you didn't read in the book that will actually present themselves to you. So take all of this for kind of a grain of salt. It's a really good identification tool, but also these mushrooms pop up outside of their windows, their so-called windows. They're going to pop up this time to this time. That's not necessarily the case. iNaturalist is an amazing app for this because everybody's posting all their finds and it's creating this. Another thing I really hate talking about is AI, but this is a really cool way that we can actually utilize AI and put all this into a database and then have all of this basically be an online foraging book. It's an amazing resource, iNaturalist. It's an app and a website. This pocket guide by David Aurora is amazing. He eats stuff that I would never eat. So his edibility guide is really interesting to look at. All right, importance of fungi. They literally are the basis of all this life on this planet in a lot of ways. This is an example of mycorrhizal fungi in grass and non-mycorrhizal fungi being in grass. It allows the roots to extend exponentially, more water retention, more communication amongst species. Which is really important. Most people don't even know that it's its own kingdom of life. It is so important to know that because they're commonly grouped together as plants, and that is wildly inaccurate. Ethnomycological implications, what they used to be used for. I really want to get to know this better. So if any of you have any resources for me to get in contact with indigenous healers, anything like that, I really want to learn more about this aspect specifically. I know they used them a lot in their clothing, their dyes. I know they used them as dyes a lot. They obviously knew about their importance in soil, and for building soil, they did mushroom papers out of them. Obviously, spiritual work was surrounding this heavily, so yeah, something to keep in mind is these have been used for thousands and thousands of years. Sometimes it just takes science thousands of years to catch up. No, we're really just kind of proving what these things have been used for thousands of years already. So we're just being yeah, you guys were right. is what I think we need to keep doing. Yeah, you guys are right. Like, you had it. All right, so preserving them, sun dry them if you can. Dehydrator is not important. Actually, sun drying is more important because they will, actually just like our skin, they'll absorb the UV radiation, convert that to usable vitamin D. It's absolutely fascinating. So I would actually, it's not like that with all mushrooms. Shiitake specifically is very much like that, but I would recommend just sun drying them anyways. I really think that they do better in the sun as dried. Encapsulating them, I would prefer to have them heat dry or heat process first. I would do some sort of heat processing to make them more bioavailable to the gut, because like I said, raw mushrooms are basically indigestible for us for the most part. Cooking, I already covered this. I just want to get into mushrooms. But real quick, I feel like this quote from Merlin Sheldrake is really important. Imagine the puzzlement of an extraterrestrial anthropologist who discovered after decades of studying modern humanity that we had something called the internet. It's a bit like that for modern day, or for contemporary ecologists. And this, once you figure this concept out, is like they already had an interweb. They already had a communication device. They are, in my opinion, entirely sentient. But we also anthropomorphize them, and we try to put them in our own words and our own categories. And that we're not going to fully understand them if we keep doing that. It's profound. Calvadia species, puffballs. How many of you guys have seen puffballs? Puffballs pop up everywhere. So generally, if they're clear throughout the entire center, if you slice down the middle, clear through or white through the entire center, they're good. There are very, very few deadly lookalikes. Sometimes the death angel in its very early stages looks like an egg. And some people will confuse that. But I would recommend also, like I was talking about learning the ecology, we need to learn each life cycle of each mushroom too. So some of them pop up out of eggs, some of them pop up out of like decomposing wood. We really need to learn them in all of their fruiting stages so that we can understand their edibility better and discern them between species that are poisonous and non-poisonous. Puffballs are a great mushroom for people to get into for their first foraging mushrooms because they're so edible across the board almost. If you don't see spores in them, they're pretty much good. They're really tasty in my opinion. Some people will find them along roadways and say they taste like chemicals, which I could see that. They're bioremediators, so they're bioremediating a lot of the heavy metals in there. I would just keep that in mind. Just don't forage around anything that might be like washing from a mining reclaim or something like that. July through September, that's pretty rough. They'll pop up outside of that window, and they're very, very hardy. I would recommend slicing them thin and then just sun drying them if you wanted to keep them for a long time, because they tend to be like so much food that you should preserve it, in my opinion. It is really hard to eat an entirety of a puffball in like one sitting. It's really gross, actually. You have to preserve it, in my opinion, if you want that to last a long time. And I think they really do really well as powder, honestly, as like a seasoning. But yeah, the Calvadia species is very, very friendly. They're very easy to identify. Like I said, solid white. Always take a cross section because sometimes the spores will start from the very center and it's really confusing. But sometimes they'll be like bigger than, I mean, that one was like the size of a watermelon. So it's so much food. A lot of people will recommend brushing all this dirt off. I would recommend eating those microbes and keeping those minerals. But that's just me. I'm kind of weird. I'll like, even if I find like a buggy boletus, I'll be like, oh, extra protein, extra minerals. I don't really care. But it will really turn some people off. There's some other ones that pop up very, very small. This one is actually really close to my heart. It always finds me for some reason, the sculpted puffball. So I'm doing more research on that. I actually have it in vitro in our lab too, because I'm going to try to cultivate it out. They're saprobic, so they'll actually eat dead wood and oftentimes look like they're popping straight out of the ground. But it's oftentimes because there's like wood mulch in the ground that they're eating and then popping up through the soil. They pop up through the craziest hard-packed soil I've ever seen though. Like literally like out in this driveway we'd probably see them. They're so strong and they can pop up out of, I've seen them actually, they're known to pop up out of asphalt and concrete sometimes too, which is crazy recognizing how soft and fleshy their body is. It's really remarkable. So there's the tumbling puffball, which definitely sporulates quicker than the other ones. It's much smaller, but as long as it's white all the way through, you're good. The lycoperdon, which is a gem-studded puffball, that one is also edible if it's just solid white all the way through. I actually think it's a really nice, delicious edible. They're all very medicinal, and they're all very strong bioremediators. They all grow symbiotically with different types of lichen. It's just I really like promoting this mushroom a lot because I think it's an easy one for foragers to get into for their first year or two. It's very, very safe. Etymologically speaking, the spores were actually used as a styptic. So when people were cut and bleeding out, they would put the spores on and it would stop the hemorrhaging, but it would also be so antimicrobial that it would slow down infection. So very, very important to keep on you in like a first aid kit if you're going out, these spores, if you can keep the spores in a jar. If you've ever seen one go to spore, it's absolutely mind-blowing. It's trillions and trillions of spores that honestly are, if they're inhaled in large quantities, can kill you. They will cause respiratory illness because there was one case of these college students that were snorting lines of the puffball spores. They all died from respiratory illness, from respiratory infection, but leave it to humans to take it there. Yeah, so just be careful. Like, don't breathe them in large quantities. Like, don't put your face right next to the spores. I don't really know anybody that would be inclined to do that anyways. But the spores are very medicinal in terms of topical use, especially if you're bleeding out. The pear-shaped or the gem-studded puffball that I showed you on the very end has some really cool studies about being anti-cancer, anti-carcinogenic. But I honestly think all of them show really strong anti-tumor and anti-carcinogenic compounds. And if you think about how they pop out, they kind of pop out as like a tumor of the soil. And a lot of things are like Paracelsus wrote in the 15th century, the Doctrine of Signatures, which relates what something looks like to what it does in the body. So it's basically like a bioidentification tool. They grow like tumors, like a chaga, but it's one of the chagas known to ameliorate tumors stronger than anything else that I know of. So it's just try to make those correlations. A lion's mane split in half looks exactly like a brain. There's those go across the board. Reishi just looks just like a kidney. So yeah, you can find those like pretty much everywhere if you look in nature. Oysters. A lot of people tell me they can't find oysters here, but they are actually very, very abundant. They are on cottonwood stumps next to riverways. That is like the key. Cottonwood stumps next to riverways, but they'll pop up in many places besides that. Oyster mushrooms are notorious for eating almost anything. These are the mushrooms that I was describing will eat plastic, or not necessarily plastic, but eat trash. I've seen them pop off of teddy bears. I've seen them pop off of shoes. They eat houses frequently. They digest stuff really quickly. This is a really, really nice edible to get into because it has decurrent gills going all the way down the stipe, meaning that the gills go from the top or from the bottom of the cap all the way down the stipe. It is a very key identification characteristic for oysters specifically. And there are lots of different colors of oyster. We don't have like the pinks and the oranges as like much as the tropical zone might have in like Florida, say, but we have pearls, we have all these browns, we have sometimes like darker like blue colors will pop up, but generally if they look like that with the decurrent gills going all the way down, it's probably an oyster. Especially that smell is uncanny. It smells pretty fishy, which culinarily speaking is really, really delightful, especially paired with garlic. And this is, I just haven't really seen many toxicities or any toxicities, even from places that are pretty, like super fun sites, say. Like I've seen people eat some really gross oysters and be okay. Yeah, it's a choice edible. It's already popping up. I've already seen people on the foraging pages post about them popping up. So in Boulder, they're already popping up. In Denver, they're popping up. Here, they'll probably be in like a week or two. What's really fascinating about these is that they're actually a carnivorous mycelium, meaning that they will destroy nematodes in the soil if they need to. If there's no organic matter, they'll actually seek out nematode life, and they have all these mechanisms of destruction for the nematode specifically, but it's only if there's no organic matter to decompose first. They're intelligent enough to know that they can't attack the nematodes unless they have to. But in essence, they're carnivorous myceliums, which is really crazy to think about. And I really want to describe to you the mechanisms of action that they use to kill the nematodes, but we don't have time. They're so fascinating. The Pleurotus populinus is known as the aspen oyster because it grows typically on aspen. This is my favorite edible oyster. It's absolutely phenomenal in flavor. It puts off kind of anise aroma. It smells a lot like black licorice, and it tastes kind of similar too. It cooks out quite significantly. There's been reports of this mushroom being slightly bioluminescent as well and glowing a little bit at night, which I find really fascinating. But yeah, it's extremely savory mushroom. I really love this photo because there was a current that just dropped right in the middle of it. I just found it really beautiful. But all the oysters will have a very characteristic white to pale buff spore print also. And the spore print will be very prolific. Like, don't bring them in a place inside that you would like maybe not want to see them growing like in long term. They put off billions of spores. Even one fruiting body alone, I think, was estimated to put off 1 trillion spores, which is really, really remarkable. But yeah, downed aspens, extremely savory. That smell is very unique to this mushroom, that anise smell. So if you break it apart a little bit and just give it a little sniff, very hard to misidentify this one. This is where I was talking about the bioremediation qualities. These are literally oil spills that oysters were growing out of, and they grew massive based on the amount of contamination they were able to uptake. So there's some evidence to show that actually mushrooms will grow even bigger based on contamination. Hawkswing. This is a choice edible. It is a very easy edible to get into. Very few lookalikes. Actually, I can't think of any lookalikes that are poisonous to this. The hydnum repandum might be somewhat similar, but it does not look like this on the top at all. It is a scaly top on this hawkswing. Some people call it the hedgehog mushroom, but it's not the true hedgehog mushroom, although it's very similar. It's basically our high alpine version of the hedgehog. I'll show you what the teeth look like, but this is a very unique mushroom in that it doesn't have gills or pores. It has teeth that come down as tubules. It's very, very easy identification characteristic for this mushroom specifically. I think they taste like French fries if you slice them thin and saute them till golden brown. This is one of the most choice edibles. Like, I try to tell everybody about this edible because it pops up really frequently after it rains. It will pop up mostly in leaf litter and pop up gregariously in lots of patches. Only the younger specimens are good in my opinion. The older ones are super bitter and really gross. But when they're young, absolutely choice edible. So these are the teeth. It is really fascinating just to look at, honestly, but it's really hard to misidentify this just based on the teeth. As they get older, they're going to get this hole in the middle. This one was super bitter. They get this hole in the middle, and then they get all of these nematodes start to invade, or all of this life starts to eat the mushrooms because they need the medicine too. I'm not mad at them. So they have these tendril-like pores, technically, but they're tubules that come down, and it's almost like hair, like you can pet it. It's a really, really cool mushroom, and very hard to misidentify. These are the dryad saddles, the ones that I was talking about in Denver. It's the same, like very similar species, but this is a difference in environmental factors. This is a difference between 3,000 feet. And it's just basically a different phenotype. So very, very similar mushroom growing out in a different way based on its ecological conditions. That I'll touch on later because it's really important. So yeah, this mushroom is super good edible. It is really high in protein. Contains 7 of the 9 essential amino acids. It's a really, really good protein. In terms of a foraged food, I think this might be actually one of the top proteins. It's extremely antimicrobial in the body. There's studies to show it's very anti-carcinogenic, so remediating cancers. It does show that it's a very good bioremediator of arsenic, cadmium, mercury, and lead specifically, so just be mindful of that. This is a wonderful mushroom, though. I usually cut this mushroom right at the base. I don't pull the whole thing up. It doesn't matter, in my opinion, but I don't use the base, so I leave that for insects and for wildlife. Boletus edulis. So this is known as the porcini mushroom. We have a lot of different variations of this mushroom, but specifically, you're looking for these pores that are all white. That is a very key identification characteristic for this mushroom. It has no veil. It's very, very solid mushroom. It will just plop right out of the ground. I wouldn't recommend cutting these. I would just pluck them. There's actually studies specifically on the boletus that shows when you pluck them, it invigorates the mycelium quite a bit. So you could actually be promoting more growth by plucking them. So the only toxic lookalikes are really, really obvious. Like I've never seen somebody like, oh, I think that one's edible for like a Satan's bolete, which are bright red basically, and then bruise dark blue. So if you just came across that in the wild, just that doesn't seem right. Like that for me, intuitively, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna stay away from that one. And I think most people are that way. That blue bruising, that deep blue bruising is usually an indication of some sort of toxin. That's not always the case, but that's something to be really aware of, is that deep blue bruising. Also, if the Satan's bolete has red pores, so it's like, it looks absolutely insane. Looks like hell, but it's really, really cool. But that's really the only deadly edible or poisonous edible that looks similar. These pop up insane after rains. We have what's known as the Colorado ruby, which is the Boletus rubriceps, very, very similar to the edulous. Only they have this like ruby cap. We found a variegated one that was both white and red, which I've never seen before. It was so fascinating. And we named our son Boletus after that mushroom. The white king porcini, some people know it as the queen bolete, but a lot of people know this other. I know it as the queen bolete. It's just my favorite way to consider it because this is usually considered the king boletus. I usually just know this as the queen boletus. That works for my brain, and I usually keep it that way. Some books will say different, but either way, these are both very edible mushrooms, very delicious mushrooms, super high in antioxidants. There's been studies that have been showing that it's far higher in antioxidants than literally anything you can find in our food system. We made an extract out of this, and it was the most phenomenal extract I think we've ever made. I saw some reversals of food allergies, which was really interesting, and I really think this one's repairing that microbiome. I think this one's really, really important for that. It's not the most choice edible because it's hard to cook. It gets kind of slimy, and it's not like the best tasting, but it is so medicinal. And if you can season it correctly, it is really good edible as well. I think we all need to be consuming this mushroom more just for the sake that it pops up like so abundantly when it rains. That alone, I think nature is like, hey, you guys need this. So things that pop up really, really frequently in front of us tend to be things that we need to be using in that current time. So yeah, these all have pores. These are very characteristically white pored. These are also white pored. So you just take a look underneath if it's pores. And looks like this, pretty generally a boletus, but always post online on these Facebook groups, always get a second opinion from a forager, and then always reference your foraging book also. Try to get a couple different opinions, because a lot of times those opinions will come back different, but most of the time they'll come back pretty accurate, and then you feel just so much better about it. But the best thing is to go out with an actual forager, because once you meet the mushroom, then you never forget the mushroom, in my opinion. It's different to see these on a screen as it is to like actually personally interact with them. Personally interacting with them creates this quantum tie, and I truly believe you can never, like even if you tried, you would never forget that mushroom. Your body and your energy just know it. Concentrates mercury up to 250 times on average. So very, very important where you forage this mushroom. This is the mushroom that most people are like, this one poisoned me. And I'm like, I don't know about that. But then it's always a mine reclaim. Agaricus campestres. This one is actually related to the button mushroom. The agaricus is known as commonly as the button mushroom. It's like typical one that you can find in the store, but a lot of times in the cities you'll find big fairy rings of these guys, and they'll grow huge based on the amount of chemical load in the grass. Out here they grow really, really tiny, and they're very bitter out here versus the one that grows in grass, which is not very bitter. They're amazing edibles. They're one of the most well-studied edibles in terms of medicinal value. It is a very, very strong anti-cancer compound, anti-tumor compound as well. It has the most deadly lookalike that you can possibly have, though, pretty much, and it is the Death Angel. The Death Angel, though, it's solid white. There will be no bruising. Oftentimes, this will bruise yellow at the very base, and the Amanita has a vulva or an egg that it pops out of, and this one does not. So that is a key identification characteristic. This also has pink gills. and you'll hear them referred to as pink bottoms. Typically, I know the agaricus that have pink bottoms to be very edible and usually very delicious. If they bruise really dark yellow, stay away from them. If they have a chemical odor to them, stay away from them. Otherwise, the pink bottoms are very good edible in my opinion. They pop up in desert conditions too. Like this was actually at our land right across the street, just after a rain. So this is one that I really, really like using. It's very, very local to us. Yeah, that's a wonderful mushroom. Extremely medicinal, extreme bioremediation potential as well. This is the one that I was describing can actually grow almost on 100% oil, which is really crazy. Used as a treatment for hepatitis C. There's so many, like I couldn't even list all of the things in here for its medicinal values because it's been studied for so long and there's so many studies out there on it. It is a really, really strong immunomodulator. And if you guys don't know about immunomodulation, it's really important to learn that immunomodulation is very common amongst the mushroom family when we consume them. So what this means is that when our immune system is overexcited or depressed, it's going to bring us back to a homeostasis. A lot of herbs, not all of them, a lot of herbs will be overexcitatory or overdepressive, meaning that it's very, very bad or very large implications for an autoimmune patient to take those. Mushrooms are very different in the sense that they are very protective to the immune system. They're only modulatory. So they're not excitatory or depressive. They'll actually modulate based on where your immune system's at. It's very, very, very powerful tool that they have for healing us. The Amanita muscaria, probably the most, I want to say the most well-known out of all the mushrooms in the world. This is probably the most commonly used mushroom for a really, really long time, but our roots have been really ripped away from us. Now we know this is a deadly mushroom for some reason. If you look up death reports, there are very, very few to none of this mushroom specifically. But there's a caveat. It is related to one of the most deadly mushrooms in the world, the death angel. It is literally another Amanita. The Amanita muscaria, however, has the bright red cap. It is uncanny. It is the Santa Claus mushroom. Like it is the mushroom that people, it's our emoji in our phone. It's like literally like one of the most commonly known mushrooms. But it's not, I want to really venture into this because it's kind of a deep rabbit hole that I've been getting into. It's not as poisonous as people think it is. Although there are ways to prepare it to make it less toxic for us. So there's a lot of nuance with this mushroom, but I personally think we should be using it a lot more than we do. We've actually synthesized ADHD medication from this mushroom, which is personally what I use it for. I microdose this mushroom in order to quell anxiety and to maintain focus. So it's basically working really heavily on the GABA receptors, allowing me to stay really focused. But I've seen it affect a lot of people that way. A lot of people actually report an excitatory effect too. I really think this medicine is non-specific, as most mushrooms are, but this one particularly is very non-specific, meaning that it works differently in every single human that I've seen take it. I've seen people heal things that I could literally never explain to you why they could heal that. I think this is healing you on a quantum level. I think it's healing on a spiritual level. I really think this mushroom needs to be implemented into our current lexicon and into our current diets specifically. But I really want that strong caveat. There is an amatoxin in there that can shut down the liver if you don't have a proper microbiome and if your liver is already compromised. So there's, like I said, there's a lot of nuance to it, but I really think this one needs to be used more. There's a lot of indigenous that I've talked to that said it should be kept out of people in power because it's so good at like bringing us back to ourselves and creating like this sense of empowerment, really honestly. It's really like this sense of like fortification in the body and really I believe the soul, that is this connection that I've never felt other than using this mushroom. And Amanita Science and Magic is the Facebook group that will blow your mind. I read a new trip report every single morning on there of somebody healing a chronic illness that I literally could never even explain how that happened. Like, I don't even want to explain some of these things. I really recommend that you guys get into this group and have your mind blown because it is really, really cool to see what kinds of chronic illnesses people are healing from, literally just from this mushroom. AmanitaDreamer.net has, I think, 8 different ways to prepare this mushroom, all the way from psychoactive, so you'll hallucinate, to completely non-psychoactive just for culinary purposes. So it's a really, really fun mushroom to get into, but not necessarily for the novice. But I really don't want people to be afraid of this mushroom anymore. This mushroom is not something to fear. She's a really, really divine creature or entity, and she needs to be really respected. And I think she's finding us for a reason. It's the Colorado state mushroom. Like, this is the state mushroom. It pops up abundantly here. I think we need to be using her a lot more. If you guys are scared of the internal use, I would highly recommend, if you find them, to absorb them into either alcohol or oil and use it topically for pain. I've never experienced anything better. I've had some chronic headaches throughout my life, and nothing has healed me like the Amanita. And that was just as a salve, so topical use. I've had people come up with chronic pain in their joints too, and they use our Amanita liniment pretty frequently. And they actually get stressed out when it's not there, but that's why I'm encouraging people to go find them. It's a hallucinogenic compound that's free for you to go find, that's not illegal. Like, that is sick, right? Yeah, the Amanita is Amanita muscaria is an awesome mushroom. The Amanita pantherina and the Amanita phalloides are both gray and white. They're very easy to identify in terms of just the color alone. I would stay away from any of them that aren't bright red. There's some nuance to it. Some of them pop up really bright orange, but as long as they're not white and gray, they're a lot easier to work with, known as the muscaria specifically. But there's so many resources online now about how to use this mushroom. I would recommend using your intuition, because that's how I got into this mushroom, and that's how I've been healing from this mushroom specifically, is using my own intuition. The one way that I prepare it for a microdose is the one way Amanita Dreamer says not to do it. So use your intuition for this mushroom especially. We forgot a basket, so I had to use my shirt. Dry them in the sun. It's a really easy way to preserve this mushroom. All of the ibotenic acid, which is a lot of where the medicine is what people are saying, is in the red cap. So a lot of people say toss the stalks, but I really think there's a lot of medicine in the stalks. And there's a lot to be said about the entourage effect, consuming the entirety of a mushroom versus just an extract of that mushroom or just like one constituent of that mushroom. That entourage effect is really being pushed into our popular lexicon. I think because we're being inundated with so many toxins, and we don't know the entourage effect of the toxin load that we're dealing with. But I want to encourage all of us to think about the entourage effect in every single thing that we eat. Like, we can't pull out these specific compounds and have that entourage effect that we can in the entirety of the fruiting body itself. It's a really, really impactful medicine that we cannot even comprehend yet based on the amount of complexity to it. Morels. I want to really caution people. People have died from morels. Dave Sushi, I don't want to say killed, but there's three deaths that just came from Dave Sushi in Montana from morels specifically. They were pickled, so they were not cooked on high heat. I think that was the number one issue. They were from China. I think that's a number two issue. That those people may have had a dead microbiome. That could be a major third issue. So if you find this mushroom, good for you, because it is hard for me to find. I find one on my birthday every year. And I don't know why it works like that. I don't find them, they find me. And they'll pop up in the weirdest spots. Like, I had to look underneath this hole, at this cave that I crawled into just to find that. And I don't even know what drew me to it. One really popular lookalike is the stinkhorn. And if you guys have ever smelled that mushroom, you'll never forget it. It is such a horrifically strange smell. There's some folklore to say that actually if you smell it and you like it, there's use for it in terms of your own fertility, specifically with women, which I find really fascinating because it looks like a penis. Like, it is very, very phallic looking. In China, they actually take these in the egg form and they pickle them, which I find just absolutely disgusting. But I really love that they do that. I love that other cultures experiment in other ways with mushrooms, and I really want to take more from that. I just, on the surface level, I'm just like, whoa, that sounds gross. But cook them on really high heat for at least 20 minutes if you find morels. Very important. Also, if you find a big patch, they're actually really easy to propagate. They're known to be very easily cultivated now at this point. There's a lot of farms that have figured it out, but I've seen really good success if you take a patch of them, put them in a big bowl of water, and have a spore solution that you can then put on wood chips. I've seen really good success with that. So if you want morels popping up in your own landscape. They're very, very common to pop up in burn scars. So right after a burn, like a year or two after a burn, they'll usually pop up everywhere because they're bioremediating what happened there and kind of rebalancing the pH of the soil. It's unclear whether or not the pH unbalance or imbalance creates the growth, or the growth is there to remediate the pH balance, but one or the other for sure. Which is fascinating because mycelium is actually modulating the pH of the soil as it moves through it. So if it's too acidic or too alkaline, it will actually excrete these enzymes to reduce or lower or up the pH based on what it needs. It's super cool. Verpas, sometimes referred to as half-free morels. I would recommend just sticking with the common morels that are always hollow through the middle. They will always be hollow through the middle from stalk to stipe. That is a really, really easy way to identify true morels. It's a very controversial topic, true morels versus false morels, which False Morels Demystified is an amazing group on Facebook. These guys just grow much longer in the stock form. They look a lot more like stinkhorns. I personally just stay away from them, to be honest. I've seen some GI upset with them, but they're so similar to the morel that I find it important. They just have that stalk rather than like this really, really short one, and it's mostly fruiting body up there. So yeah, I would just stay away from the verpas. The Gyrometras are known as false morels. There's a really big misconception about this family. Everybody considers these poisonous, but there's only one group of poisonous Gyrometras that are hurting people, and that's, I believe, the Gyrometra esculente or esculenta. But most of the other ones, these are amazing guides you can look up online. The Western North American Gyrometra guide, I think, is more specific to us. They look a lot like morels, but there's so much fear around them that I really wanted to throw these in there. But that page, False Morels Demystified, blows my mind all the time. People eat all of these, and I always thought they were inedible. Sueless species. Sueless species are usually categorized by their brightly colored pores. This one, ironically, does actually bruise blue, but it is my favorite Sueless edible. One of my favorite Sueless edibles. I try to educate about this mushroom because it pops up so frequently. It's not the most choice edible, I'll be totally honest. When you cook it, it's kind of slimy. And it is not the best tasting, very medicinal. But it pops up so frequently that I'm just like, I gotta throw this in there because I find it all the time. And it usually is one of the first to pop up. So the Sueless will always have pores. And they're usually pretty large pores. I would recommend always peeling the caps off because the cap, or the top layer of the cap, like in that photo, because the top layer of the cap sometimes is known to cause GI upset, but I really do think this is coming down to how it's cooked and our mycobiomes. So just take that into consideration. They're mycorrhizal with Douglas fir, which I find really cool because it can't be cultivated yet, or we don't know how to cultivate it yet, so it has to be found in the wild. And I'm really fascinated by those species because I just want to force people out into nature, like just get out there. So it's really fun to find these. They're symbiotic with fir trees, which is really cool. A lot of conifers will like this mushroom as well. These mushrooms, when I say mycorrhizal, it means they're supplying these trees and these bushes with needed nutrients. Sometimes the nutrients are actually already there in the soil, but the mycelium needs to break it down first and then disseminate it to the plants. It's also a way that they can communicate with each other, which is really fascinating. The Sueless breviipes is the short stem slippery jack. It's very similar in that it has these yellow pores. I really tend to think that these porous mushrooms are, in general, less poisonous and less toxic than the guild mushrooms. I really don't like saying that because people take that as like all guild mushrooms are poisonous. That's definitely not the case, but I do find that across the board, these polypores are a bit safer. Thank you. A bit safer. All of these Suelesses look very similar, and I would just refer to the local guide. I just like to throw these in there because it's a very safe family to get into. They all look very similar. They all have those really yellow pores, and they're all very medicinal, and they pop up mostly at the same time. I really wanted to cover this aspen orange cap because a lot of people have GI upset with this mushroom, specifically this aspen orange cap, which looks very similar to the Lexinum fibrillosum. A lot of people call this a Boletus species, but it's a Lexinum species. So it's actually different. It's in the Boletaceae family, but this is an entirely different mushroom than the Boletus edulis. A lot of people get sick from this mushroom. I tend to completely stay away from this. It pops up everywhere under aspens. There's a lot of Europeans that will come over here and they eat this in their homelands, and they'll come here and just get totally sick. It's same looking mushroom, same mushroom, grown in different ecological settings. So I personally think it's mostly tied to toxic load. But I can't definitively say that. The shaggy mane, everybody I think becomes familiar with this mushroom eventually. It has a super inky goop that pops out and it covers insects so that they can disseminate their spores. It's a really, really fun edible. You just have to wait until it pops up completely and flares out basically. Otherwise, you could get this Chlorophyllum molybdetes, but that also has a really red bruising and a dark green spore print, the toxic one. So this is actually really easy to identify just based on the shagginess and then the way it flares out. This chlorophyllum looks similar only in its early stages. So that's when I'm saying learn all the mushrooms in all their stages. It's really important. The shaggy mane is amazing. There's various different work that I'm doing with humanure and shaggy mane. Shaggy mane is a coprophilic mushroom, meaning that it loves dung, but it prefers other organic matter as well. But specifically, it's really good at bioremediating poop, which I think this has huge implications for us in humanure. The Ganoderma oblinatum is a local reishi to us. It's known as the artist conch. People draw on the bottom of it all the time. This can be used as a medicinal mushroom. It's very, very hard, so you can't eat it, but you can slice off portions of it and it will continue to regrow back every year. I love this mushroom. Super medicinal. Flemulina velutipes is known as our local enoki. We have the most beautiful enokis I've ever seen here, but they have to have a velvet foot because they do have one deadly lookalike, and it's the deadly gallerina. So this one's not necessarily for the novice, but once you learn these identification characteristics, it's very simple. These have a white spore print. The deadly gallerina have a brown spore print, but they look very close. They look almost identical in some cases. This one also has a velvet base, and the deadly gallerina does not. So spore print is your key identification characteristic for this one. Fomitopsis schrankii, known as the red-belted polypore. This is one of the most abundant polypores in the world. If you're trying to use something similar to reishi in the sense of like a decoction or something like that, it's a very medicinal mushroom. The indigenous use this as an ember holder, so they would hollow out the inside and hold embers for a really long time, sometimes like weeks on end, so that they could start fires in other places. This has been used, I believe, throughout indigenous cultures very frequently, but we don't know like a ton about it. Very medicinal, lots of anti-cancer studies on it. The Felinus tremulae, I get approached all the time. They're like, I found chaga, I found chaga, I found chaga. I love it, but it's not chaga. If it's in Colorado, it's not chaga. It's most likely this colt's foot. What I really find beautiful about people telling me that, though, is that people have been drinking this as a tea as if it was chaga for years. I've had people like, oh, I've drank this for 30 years, and I just feel great every time I drink it. I'm like, cool, you proved to me that it's a medicinal mushroom, but it's not chaga. So, not chaga, but grows abundantly in quaking aspen forests. Really nice edible mushroom that's not super well known yet. Everybody sees it though. It's everywhere. Corn smut. I wanted to throw this one in there to pay homage to Mexican culture. They find it to be prized. They actually can it and sell it. We actually see it as a pathogen. So we see it as something that's infecting our corn and that we need to get rid of. But they're like, oh my God, this is like this divine creature that came in. We need to like eat this. I personally think this is 10 times better than corn itself. It's super, super good. It tastes just like corn, sauteed up in a scramble. Amazing. But it will infect an ear of corn and grow just like this. And you want to get it when it's just like this. Otherwise, it's going to be covered in black spores. This is a super fun mushroom, though. I love this mushroom. So, research actively before consuming anything. My high suggestion for you all is to, if you haven't been introduced to a species yet, introduce yourself before eating them for the first year and slowly build up tolerance. Like, some of these mushrooms are completely edible and then toxic if you eat too many or too much. So dabble in small amounts. Always get second and third opinions if you can. But honestly, don't be scared of them. Like, you can't get poisoned by touching them. You can't even get poisoned by putting them in your mouth as long as you spit them out sooner than you metabolize them. We're literally biologically built to do this. This is super important for us to reconnect with our roots. It is so important for us to reconnect with our health and also community. And these are ways that, like, if we just get out into nature more, I think all of those pieces are really going to fall back into line. I think if we get these kids stoked on biomimicry and some of these processes that are going on that are absolutely mind expansive, we're going to find out that nature already has all of our solutions, and we're just recreating them, basically, and amplifying them. I believe that our most divine nature on this planet is to amplify the natural processes instead of diminish them. So they've been here for far longer than us. Let's just honor and study that and always try to play the student. Let's not act like we have it figured out just because we pulled out this compound and it's like maybe saved millions of lives. Really, they figured it out first. We just figured it out after them. They already had the keys and the tools. So let's just pay homage to that and really nurture your microbiome and your mycobiome by eating more mushrooms. Super important. And just get out into nature more.